Inez. Welcome, Inez. Thank you for being with us here today.
Oh, thank you so very much to you, Gauri, and the Canadian Celiac Association for giving me the opportunity to present this evening. I will admit the topic of healthy eating is a very broad topic, so it was a bit challenging to know exactly what to review and discuss tonight. I decided as such to focus on objectives, create an outline that's based on the questions that I get asked in practice. So
And before
tonight,
we go forward, Inez,
oh yes,
I am going to say something.
okay,
Inez, who is
yes.
a clinical dietitian practicing within the division of the gastroenterology, hepatology, and the nutrition at the Hospital of Sick Kids, is not only just a registered dietitian who's working extensively in celiac disease or has that experience, has been supporting us throughout at the Canadian Celiac Association. Inez completed her undergraduate and graduate studies with the University of Toronto, working closely with leaders in clinical nutrition. In collaboration with her gastroenterology team, Inez cares for patients with celiac disease as well as participates in research endeavors looking to improve the nutrition and quality of life for those affected by the autoimmune gastrointestinal conditions. And we are always very grateful for Inez, who gives us so much support as and when we want it. So, Inez, the stage is all yours.
Thank you so much again for that lovely intro. So welcome to everyone who's participating this evening. I also appreciate that the Canadian Celiac Association will have all this information available to everyone who was unable to make it out. We know life always seems to bring forth some challenges, and so if there's also not enough time to get through questions this evening, then as Gaudi mentioned, hopefully we'll be able to answer your questions and clarify any gaps that may be out there. But so kind of sort of circling back to the outline that was created for tonight, it really was based on questions that I get asked in practice and questions that families want to know. And so even though working at Sick Kids, I work with primarily youth, I also wanted to create slides and share information that isn't just focused on only youth. There's a lot of information here that will apply to adults, as we like to say. Individuals are if you're over the age of 18 years, but not just adults, also individuals in your family that may not be affected by celiac disease. So tonight I'll review the general concept of healthy eating and what that looks like for Canadians. I'll review some of the nutritional considerations of a gluten-free diet, because of course that is imperative to individuals who are affected by celiac disease. I'd like to evaluate some of the current understandings that we have with respect to the nutritional needs of individuals that are affected by celiac disease. And then kind of I'll tying it together, discuss what these recommendations for healthy gluten-free eating and living looks like, with a focus to individuals affected by celiac disease, but as I said, larger families and communities as well. So, Health Canada has this healthy eating strategy that they've come out with, and they have this tagline. It's working to make the healthier choice the easier choice for Canadians, and I really like that. But what does it mean? What does it mean to all of you to know what Health Canada is doing? Well, I can reassure you that a lot of information is available on Health Canada website. But in general, if I could briefly let everyone know, Health Canada is working to improve healthy eating information. Okay, and that's what we're going to talk about tonight. They're also working to improve the nutritional quality of foods. And so you can't change an apple. I mean, that is what Mother Nature created per se, but they're looking at more so focusing on packaged processed foods when I'm talking about quality. They're looking to work on protecting vulnerable populations. And one of the populations that they're looking at supporting right now are children under the age of 13 years, which we know are a group of individuals that are highly influenced by marketing and ad campaigns and what that means to achieving healthy eating goals. Okay. Also supporting increased access to and availability of nutritious foods for Canadians. Okay. And so as part of this new approach to overall healthy eating and a healthier lifestyle, Health Canada released sort of, I'm going to call them revised Canada's Food Guide to Healthy Eating. Essentially, it came out in 2019. It was all over the news. There was a lot of, I don't want to say controversy about it, but a lot of interesting considerations that came out when it first was launched. It is actually mobile friendly. There's web applications, which allows it to become easier for Canadians to access information, whether they're at work or playing or, just at home. But I want to let everyone know that this new food guide, these new recommendations for healthy eating were really stimulated by research, revising not only what we eat, but how we eat it, and more so in a larger effort to curb chronic health conditions like heart disease and diabetes, which have been associated with poor dietary quality. And so if you look at the visual, this picture that I took from Health Canada's website on the right there, looks very different than, that old rainbow that everyone was used to seeing for years. And I just want to highlight some key differences between the old food guide and the new food guide. There aren't food groups here, right? We've kind of sort of taken away from these traditional 4 food groups and that you have to eat from all 4 food groups to meet your nutritional needs. There's a much greater emphasis right now on eating fruits and vegetables and plant-based proteins, reducing the emphasis on meat and dairy sources of certain products and protein sources. There's a lot more encouragement around whole grains, and choosing whole grains more often, which we'll chat about a little bit later. And then, of course, choosing water as your drink. Interestingly enough, fruit juice used to be considered a serving of fruit, previous to this revision, and there was always a lot of conversation about that and what that means to overall health. And so, these are the larger changes and the topics that we will meet again a little bit more intimately as we go through this webinar. Okay, so, while some of the recommendations are different, I would say it's probably, fair to say that the concept of healthy eating is not new for Canadians. There's growing rates of obesity and chronic diseases in industrialized nations, and this has very much prompted public health and education experts to learn more about diets and foods and intakes and eating behaviors around individuals throughout the world. And so one of the things that Canada does is it has something called a Canadian Community Health Survey. This is a federal survey that was created to provide health information at both national and provincial levels. And I like pulling data out from the Canadian Community Health Survey, of course, not myself personally, but publications that, colleagues in the nutrition and medical community have delved into to answer some very, very specific nutrition-related questions. And here are a few studies that I found particularly interesting as it related to their results. So the Slater group used the survey data. It was 2013, I believe, the survey data from 2013. The survey's done every year. And they looked at self-perceived eating habits and food skills of Canadians. So essentially, this is what you think of how well you're doing as it relates to healthy eating. And they found that nearly half of all the respondents reported excellent or very good eating habits. This woohoo, way to go, half of Canada, and nearly the same proportion of Canadians reported having good or fair eating habits. So likely feeling like, I'm doing all right, not so bad. In addition, the study found that the majority of Canadians report to have very good food skills. You know, this is including things like shopping with a list, shopping on a budget, reading those food labels and knowing what that means, but also knowing how to prepare food, cooking meals at home, this kind of stuff. So, you know, great positive feedback information. However, when other investigators asked different questions and pulled survey results, not necessarily from the same year, but using the same approach, it was quite fascinating how different some of those trends were, quote, perceived. Okay, so the Colapinto group, for example, showed that between 2007 and 2014, the intake of fruits and vegetables amongst Canadians was low. You know, comparable between those 2 years, you know, about 5 servings. So this goes back to Canada's old food guide to healthy eating, where there was recommendations around how many servings of each food group you should have. But ultimately showing that Canadians were eating half of what was recommended. Okay, the Hoiseni group showed that nearly 64% of children and teenagers, as well as 59% of adults, fell into what was categorized as the lowest whole grain consumption category, meaning that 0 to 20% of their total grain intake came from whole grains, which is less than half of what's actually recommended, because the recommendations are that at least 50% of your total whole or your total grain intake should come from whole grains. So I find this data interesting because Canadians in general feel like they're doing a pretty good job eating healthy or having healthy eating habits, whereas the data, which is also survey data, so the same individuals filled this data out, are telling us that we're not meeting our fruit and vegetable intake. We're not eating enough whole grains. We're probably, ergo then, not eating healthy. You know, and so what does that mean relative to the gluten-free diet? Okay, so while you know, tonight's evening and the webinar in particular isn't about the strict gluten-free diet for treating celiac disease, I do still think it's really important just to provide everybody with a kind of sort of overview again. When we think of whole foods, foods as they exist in nature, we're talking about wheat, barley, rye, and triticale being sources of gluten, okay? And of course, that only oats labeled gluten-free are considered safe at this time in Canada for individuals with celiac disease and when it's medically advised. All right. When we're referring to processed packed foods, foods that have been handled by someone else and packaged available at the grocery store, of course, the foods that are labeled gluten-free must contain less than 20 parts per million in Canada in order to have that label, but that obviously not all foods that are necessarily safe for individuals with celiac disease will have gluten-free on the label. And so, you know, knowing what those products contain in terms of ingredients and whether they have gluten in them is very important, you know. And all of this is very general, all of this is very basic, and we call this the gluten-free diet for treating celiac disease. But of course, I in practice don't very much like this word diet, I will admit. I think calling it, you know, more than just a diet is important because I feel like diet in general terms has so many connotations and interpretations to it. And I think it's just important to remind ourselves that this is actually treatment for an autoimmune condition, you know, and not to forget that. But in addition to it being therapy, the gluten-free diet is nourishment, nourishment for all of us, which is why I think there's often so many questions about what to eat and how much and how often and what's okay, you know. And the research tells us that individuals with celiac disease are at risk of nutritional deficiencies. What does that mean? Nutritional deficiencies means that the levels in either your blood or in storage sites in your body are low. Okay, and this is important to appreciate when we get a chance to dig deeper about healthy eating and the gluten-free diet. There are a few main reasons why individuals with celiac disease can experience nutrient deficiencies, you know, and the first two reasons listed here for everyone, both active disease or inflammation, and in particular in Canada, limited fortified gluten-free grain flour options. So I'm going to definitely say that's an edit I need to add in there. We're talking about grain flours, not grains themselves, okay? Those are reasons. And really the meat and potatoes of tonight's talk is looking at poor intake of nutrient-dense foods. And what does that mean? Because obviously if you're eating healthy, if you're eating well, you are ensuring that you get the most bang for every bite, you know, and how is that going to look for individuals affected with celiac disease? And again, not just youth, but everyone in general. But if we just quickly circle back to inflammation, we know that happens in the presence of gluten if you have celiac disease. So those cells in the small intestine that are shown in the figure to your right, you know, those are the ones that are affected. So if I was to do an English to English translation here, inflammation basically means red, sore, and or swollen. And so if you look at the cells of the intestine, the small intestine, if you look at it under a microscope, as shown in this picture from About Kids Health, which is an education website that's supported by Sick Kids, the villi, that absorptive surface area where the nutrients are absorbed, they're shortened, right? And so this is going to impact how well nutrients get into the body. And so not only get circulated with the blood in and around to each cell to do its job and do what's needed, but also to get to those areas in the body where those nutrients might be stored. So when the body needs them, it can access those nutrients. Okay, you know, and why do we care? Why do we care if nutrients are absorbed well or not? You know, of course, in children and youth in particular, growth and development are important. But for anyone, you know, energy, being able to function, being able to enjoy day-to-day activities, they're all important considerations. You know, and we know that in the presence of nutritional deficiencies, individuals are also at risk of developing comorbidities. Comorbidity, which means basically having another health condition. And these can develop when there is a lack of nutrients in the body. So for example, calcium, phosphorus, vitamin K, protein, vitamin D, these are all important for bone health. Not just growing tall, you know, not just having strong bone so they don't break as easily, but also bone is a living tissue. It's vascularized. Right? There's a lot that goes on with bone and the bone marrow, and you want to make sure that that stays healthy. Iron is needed to make hemoglobin. Hemoglobin's that cell, that red blood cell that carries oxygen throughout the entire body, you know, keeping us alert and awake and active. You can certainly develop anemia if you don't have enough iron in the body. You know, and in this picture, I really like this figure. It was created by the Kreutz Group, you know, in a recently published review. A review article is a publication where it summarizes a lot of the information that's available to the medical community about a specific topic. And I very much like this picture. It's not just kid-friendly, but I think it really shows all of the different comorbidities and risk in celiac disease. But what was interesting in this review article was that the author, they actually showed that both newly diagnosed individuals with celiac disease, where you would expect there to be nutritional deficiencies, right? Because if you're not getting sent to a gastroenterologist because you have GI symptoms, it's usually in children because you're not growing, which means enough nutrition may not be getting into the body, or you have some of these comorbidities already, like anemia is a common presentation of celiac disease in children and youth, you know. So not only in newly diagnosed patients and individuals with celiac disease are there nutritional deficiencies, but even amongst individuals that are adhering to that strict gluten-free diet, you know, they're following that treatment. They also have nutritional deficiencies. And I just wanted to highlight that because I think it's something for everyone that's participating tonight to be aware of and to talk to your medical team about if you're concerned. You know, another interesting conclusion of this review was that it's not very clear, it's not very slam dunk or black and white if supplementation helps with some of the healing that's needed when you're newly diagnosed, or to correct some of the deficiencies that are out there, or to improve the comorbidity. For example, if you have compromised bone health, you know, it's not really all that black and white whether or not, you know, taking more vitamin D is going to improve your bone health or not. And I think that's really important too. As you speak with your medical team about, you know, are you monitoring for nutritional deficiencies? You know, what can be done to monitor for that? What are the symptoms associated with this? What are your concerns, and how to tackle that? Because really what this review is telling us at this point is that it needs to be tailored to the individual patient, and there aren't generalizations that we can and stem from that, you know. But in addition to absorption of nutrients and these nutritional risks, it's also the quality of the gluten-free diet that's a factor that may affect the nutritional status of anyone impacted by celiac disease. You know, and there have been lots of studies that have looked at that. And I really very much like these two figures, which is why I put both of them here, because I couldn't decide between which one I wanted to show. They're basically giving us the same message, that in that body of knowledge that we have in the medical community right now, you know, there's concerns around the nutritional quality of a gluten-free diet. We can say, in general, gluten-free foods compared to gluten-containing counterparts or similar foods and or products, they are richer in calories or nutrition. So that means gluten-free products typically are higher in calories, and that comes from more sugars, more simple carbohydrates, more trans and saturated fats. Okay, that's what contributes to those extra calories. However, they're also lower in typically fiber and some very key micronutrients like B vitamins, iron, and zinc, which are so important to maintaining health. Okay, and while both of these figures are basically showing us the same story, they're providing a picture of the same kind of sort of trend, I did want to star and highlight for everyone that not all gluten-free foods are deficient or low in the nutrients identified above. You know, and this is where we're going to touch upon educating ourselves on knowing the nutritional content of foods and products, and, you know, where do we find reputable, resourceful information to know about that. So these are generalizations. They are not specific to certain products at all or to certain foods at all. But in Canada in particular, one of the reasons that we know that the gluten-free diet is low in some key nutrients is that those gluten-free grain flours are not necessarily fortified. Okay, so it's a requirement in Canada that all wheat flour is fortified with thiamine, which is B1, riboflavin, which is B2, niacin, which is B3, folic acid, which is B9. Do you guys like that? I actually memorized that. I rehearsed that. And iron. I generally will admit I'll usually Google which one is what, but I thought it was really important for tonight to let everyone know that there's a lot of B vitamins that are fortified in wheat flour. You know, this requirement at this stage is not enforced for gluten-free grain flours in Canada, you know, and while we appreciate across the globe that food fortification is considered a cost-effective, it's also a sustainable intervention looking at improving micronutrient accessibility and malnutrition and comorbidities, it doesn't necessarily mean that it applies across the board. And while I know that fortification of gluten-free grains is a topic close to the heart of many members of the Canadian Celiac Association and the larger community of people affected by celiac disease, I just want to encourage everyone to continue to advocate for this need, you know, because it is one step where we can improve the nutritional quality of the gluten-free diet. You know, a couple of more references available in this table for others just to show much of what we already know. You know, gluten-free diet typically tends to be a bit higher in fat, higher in calories, lower in proteins and some key micronutrients. So this is one step where fortification can be very supportive. But more so now the impetus, you know, the interest for this webinar, which is around healthy gluten-free eating. It's the last and final contributing factor to nutritional deficiencies that I highlighted earlier amongst people who are living with celiac disease. And this table actually summarizes some really interesting and key findings amongst Canadian youth as it relates to diet. So the major group facilitated a multi-center study from 3 Canadian sites, including Stollery Children's Hospital in Alberta, McMaster Children's Hospital in Hamilton, Ontario, and Sick Kids here in Toronto, Ontario. Participants with celiac disease or with mild GI complaints aged between 2 and 18 years were included. And this group found that many participants had dietary patterns, so diets, they were eating patterns that were consistent with what's now referred to as the Western diet. Okay, and we're going to actually go into that into a little bit more detail, you know, a couple slides from now. But this diet in general is described as having poor quality. And what was found in this study was that the diet of the individuals was high in sugar, high in fat, high in salt, you know, high in animal proteins like processed meats and certain dairy products that were all considered to be of poor quality. Comparable to the results of this study, the LU group also included youth, children aged 3 to 18 years from Stollery and from Sick Kids with celiac disease, but also with celiac disease and type 1 diabetes. And they found that many participants, and I say this in quotation marks, needed improvement with respect to their diets. The diets were also found to be rich in sugars and saturated fats. And comparably, similarly, the Alzaben group, who completed their study out of Stollery and studied children with and without celiac disease aged 4 to 18. And they found that many participants, regardless of the diagnosis of celiac disease, had a healthy eating score. So this is a healthy eating index score that was less than 80. So it meant that either the diet needed some improvement or that the diet was of poor quality. You know, the participants in this study with celiac disease, they ended up having higher fiber intake compared to individuals without having celiac disease, but lower intake of folate, you know, and they actually didn't meet their intake of fruit and vegetable, you know. So what the results of these studies collectively are really suggesting or indicating is that potentially there's some wiggle room there in terms of how the gluten-free diet can be improved as it relates to minimizing and limiting some of those high sugar, high fat, high refined, you know, and other type products, and really increasing the amount of foods that are rich in B vitamins and fiber and some of these other micronutrients that we talked about. But hear me out, everyone. Okay, this isn't just an issue in Canada. You know, these results are actually consistent with other centers around the world and among centers that look after adults affected by celiac disease. Okay, so dietary intake patterns amongst adults with or without celiac disease in Australia, as was reported by Shepherd and Gibson, are quite similar. And you know, they concluded that it may be related to poor daily choices and some poor daily behaviors as it relates to eating. In the UK, the Kinsey group, they showed that in their cohort of participants, the intake of adults with celiac disease was comparable to the general population. You know, there were some differences for sure, and all of these studies have details that are quite specific to the questions that they want answered. So let me remind everyone that these tables that I'm sharing with you all this evening, they're very general kind of sort of summary points here, but all sort of alluding to the same thing, that not just in Canada, but in other countries in the world, individuals, whether they have celiac disease or not, they're really not necessarily eating healthy. And so how do we get there? How do we get to that point? What is this whole thing? Bring back the slide that I introduced at the beginning and what Health Canada is saying that we as Canadians, quote, should be eating, right? So eating whole, fresh foods more often, lots of fruits and vegetables, choosing these whole grains, eating more plant-based sources of protein, and really understanding food labels and knowing what it is that you're eating. And that's what I'd like to chat with you today. So here's another way of looking at healthy eating. All right, I'm a very visual individual. I like seeing things. They just make more sense to me when I can see it. I think back to some of my years in undergrad and trying to retain any information when it's given to you in a lecture was very difficult for me. And so I tried to find pictures that I thought would really exemplify what healthy eating looks like. And I love this pyramid that's created by the Department of Nutrition at the Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health. So that's the pyramid on your left. It is strategically placed to a pyramid on your right, which is depicting a Western style diet, a Western style food pyramid, which was actually created by Rizzello and colleagues recently in a review article looking at the implications of a Western style diet in inflammatory bowel disease. And so I've got this, I don't even know what this symbol is called, but I call it the no, you don't want to go there symbol. It's the circle with the hash, the line through it. And if you look at sort of how a pyramid is designed and how figures like this are interpreted, obviously the base or the bottom of the pyramid is what you want to eat more of and what you want your diet rich in. And as you go up the pyramid, that's what you want to eat less of or have less of in your diet. So if you look at the figure on the left, again, all of the concepts that I've briefly mentioned tonight, the fruits, the vegetables, the whole grains, the non-animal sources of proteins. As you go up, moving your way through the pyramid, you can see the figure showing those recommendations versus a Western style diet, a Western style of food intake. You've got pictures of colored beverages, you've got sodas, you've got fruit juices, you've got cakes, you've got processed foods, and you kind of sort of have meats and maybe not healthy fats, and you've got potentially maybe too much dairy that's there. And as you get to the top, you kind of sort of get these legumes and herbs that individuals that adhere to this kind of diet might only eat a few times a month. And so if that kind of also helps individuals see what it is that we're all learning about and talking about tonight, I hope that it highlights it. But if it doesn't, let's talk about each one of these recommendations individually. Okay, because I think it's important, fruits and vegetables. Look at this, half the plate. They say half of everything that we should be eating, meals and or snacks, should contain fruits and vegetables. Okay, so it's not just thinking about, okay, fruits and vegetables, let's add them to our plate, but also all the other considerations that may impact our ability to optimize getting enough fruit and vegetables in our diet. Okay, so I will continue to talk to everyone tonight about, some ideas and strategies to eat healthy and to eat well. But I do want to say now at this time, and I will say it again, I think it's also important to know what are the factors that can compromise or that can make it hard for somebody to have fruits and vegetables in their diet. So in Canada in particular, accessibility is a huge issue. We know living in rural areas does not make it easy to get fresh produce. And or affordable produce. We deal with seasons in Canada, some of obviously which last longer and are harsher than others. So, how seasons affect availability, but also to learn how to shop in season when it's more affordable for certain products, because we know cost, especially during pandemics like COVID, come into play, and certain produce is quite costly, particularly if there is shortages or if there is any kind of callback that might impact accessibility. So it's not just about, what it is that we say you should be doing. It's also about acknowledging that there's going to be factors that are going to affect your ability to eat healthy. And this is the information that the Canadian Celiac Association needs to know, the medical community needs to be made aware of, but more so our federal and provincial leaders. Okay, so please continue to share your concerns and to voice them, because collectively the voice, we hope, can be heard. But then kind of sort of going back to these recommendations around adding fruits and vegetables into the diet, and by all means, I am not a chef. I am not trained in culinary arts whatsoever, but there's some recommendations that I do have for everyone that I hope would be helpful, like having, raw fruits and vegetables available in the home all the time. Have them in baskets, have them in the refrigerator, have them available and in your face, so that they are as convenient as maybe some packaged or processed foods. Cutting fruits and vegetables up the night before, storing them in the refrigerator, having them ready to chop up into meals, so that you've already done some of the prep work, or just to complement as a snack is an idea. Also, knowing how to prepare, particularly vegetables, less so fruits, because let's be honest, fruits are primarily consumed raw or added into baked goods, But when we're talking about preparing vegetables, I would say boiling is blah. Please don't boil vegetables, it ruins them, okay? Not only does it leaches nutrients from them, but it also gives them a very odd texture, that makes them unappealing. Herbs and vinegars and spices, remembering textures, steam, grill, saute, leave a little bit of crunch, leave a little bit of bite, learning how to take frozen vegetables and just tossing them into things like stir fries or soups. Peas are so convenient for that. You can always have a bunch of frozen peas and toss a handful into anything, and frozen. Please don't boil or microwave peas before you use them. That will also ruin them, and getting into this idea of not hiding fruits or vegetables in the diet, but really learning how to incorporate them into family favorite recipes. Think meatloaves, think stews, think baked goods. There's so much that can be done with beets, for example. Pureed beets can be added into muffin recipes and loaf recipes, and you wouldn't even know they were there. Avocado, which is a fruit, by the way, is one of my favorite fruits to add to things like smoothies and to baked recipes. Healthy fats, great creamy texture. It's not about hiding avocado, it's just about knowing how to use them. And then moving on to whole grains. Whole grains are talked about everywhere now. They are, the topic du jour. I gotta say, I have to Google this picture that I've put up for everyone quite frequently, because I still don't remember exactly what every part constitutes a whole grain, okay? So don't feel bad if you don't. But basically, if you want to know what a whole grain is, it's the edible part of these cereals, or pseudo-cereals as they're called, in the entire grain. So it's the endosperm plus the germ plus the bran, okay? And so refined grains, things like white flour and white rice, they're considered refined because they've had their bran and germ removed. So if one or more parts of the entire grain has been removed, it's now been refined. And so you don't get the health benefits from it when these parts have been removed. And this table listed here for everyone is some gluten-free whole grains that can be incorporated into the diet. Oats, again, starred, because you want to make sure that they are safe gluten-free oats if you have celiac disease. But really highlighting for everyone all of the different options that are available out there that can be added. Buckwheat, of course, one of the most confusing whole grains out there. It is, yes, naturally gluten-free. I like to call it kasha for this reason, so that I don't confuse people around wheat and not. But it can be treated like rice or barley, and it can be added as a side dish or into soups and casseroles quite nicely. Millet can be used a lot like quinoa. It can be turned into a salad. It can be added to curries and stews. But it's about keeping these staples in your pantry and replacing some of the more traditional grains that are common in the diet with some of these gluten-free whole grains. And then this other really sort of, I'm going to say, new kind of concept around having more plant sources of protein in your diet is something that isn't quite considered to be very Western. For some cultures, of course, this is a no-brainer. For many, many individuals who also don't eat any animal or any byproduct of animals, this is a huge kind of sort of source of proteins for everyone. But this idea of having more plant-based proteins in the diet as part of healthy eating, I think is important. I also often have to refer to myself exactly what pulses means, also known as legumes. It includes beans, chickpeas, lentils, and peas. Okay, and I specifically put peanut under the category of pulses for two reasons. Peanuts are not nuts, they are actually a legume, but also to highlight that for allergy reasons, and I won't delve into this either. COVID and returning to school, I know, is a hot topic for many families, but we know that in schools for allergy reasons, peanuts and tree nuts are not allowed. So it becomes something that is a little bit harder when you're thinking about what you could pack for school, so to speak. But to say that it doesn't mean that it can't be incorporated into the diet of youth that are affected by celiac disease or anyone in Canada in general, to try to increase variety and limiting some of those animal sources of protein in the diet that have been associated with chronic conditions later in life. The other category I'd like to highlight are seeds, and let's call them organisms, okay? So nutritional yeast and spirulinas, which you can most often and readily buy as powdered products. Definitely check to make sure that they're gluten-free and safe, but these are also other sources which I find either are added to trail mixes or to parfaits or to desserts or that kind of stuff, or into smoothies, but they're sources of protein for everyone as well. Okay, and then as we talk about micronutrients, which are vitamins and minerals, and we chatted briefly about how some of these micronutrients in particular are low in a gluten-free diet, it can get a bit overwhelming and confusing to know where to start. Where do I find foods that are rich in folic acid if gluten-free grain flours aren't fortified? How do I find foods that are rich in folic acid? Well, you go to the Canadian Celiac Association website, and they have these really, really great resourceful tip sheets. And what they do is they're addressing the gaps in nutritional adequacy of the gluten-free diet. And so each link will tell you about that particular nutrient, the amount that's needed based on someone's sex and age, and then as well as it lists foods that are rich in each nutrient. These are really, really resourceful, and they might give a lot of people ideas as to which foods they may already be eating a lot of, and maybe actually meeting the needs of that particular nutrient. Ergo, the inadequacy of the gluten-free diet may not be quite so limiting. And as well, it's not just about knowing about whole foods. So what I just chatted with all of you about were these foods, these real foods that we're encouraging you to eat. But of course you still have to purchase some food. You've got to buy products that are in a box or in a bag, and that's important. There's certainly no expectations from our end that everyone's going to go home and make gluten-free pasta every night of the week, right? You still got to buy products, but you've also got to know what you're buying and what you're buying as it relates to gluten-free foods, as well as, gluten-containing foods. Because you're shopping for your whole family. And one of the things that I find interesting is the gluten-free diet has become, certainly over the last decade, quite trendy and quite popular, and that's bittersweet because it's not necessarily because we've seen an increase in the incidence of celiac disease. We've certainly seen other conditions report improved health outcomes by going gluten-free. And so there's studies looking into it, conditions like rheumatoid arthritis, fibromyalgia, I'm trying to think, migraines, okay? So health conditions that are using gluten-free diet, but also that means that there's more products out there. And so how do you know if one product is better than the other, and how do we go about doing that? So Malini and Malini, they did a review article, and they were looking at surveys evaluating the nutritional quality of gluten-free foods on the worldwide market. And they found that compared to gluten-containing equivalents, they were typically lower in protein, high in fat, high in salt. Again, a lot of the similar trends that we already know. And so you just want to be aware that you've got to know what it is that you're buying, even if it's gluten-free and safe for you if you have celiac disease. And I'll show you how you can do that in Canada in just one quick moment. But one of the other things that I just wanted to share with everyone is that gluten-free foods that are specifically targeted for children. Charlene Elliott wrote a nice review as well. And even though the general population feels that a gluten-free diet is, in quotations, healthier than some of the other diets that people are eating, that's not necessarily the case. And so you really want to know what it is that you're eating and consuming, but you want to know by also evaluating those products, because it might be that you will find a gluten-free alternative that is, quote, a healthier option. And so how do you do that? I know that everyone listening tonight is very, very good at reading labels, right? This is something that is inherent to being strictly gluten-free, and it's super important. You guys are all champs at that. But I just wanted to let you know that there might be parts of the label that you're missing, or maybe aren't necessarily addressing as much as you are the list of ingredients. So if you look at the figure on the left, this is a nutrition facts figure from a Health Canada website, and it highlights some of the changes as part of this healthy eating strategy that Health Canada has executed in order to help consumers make more knowledgeable, informed decisions about their products. And so some of the changes are highlighted here, like calories is in a bigger font, and it's got a bold underneath it. And you can actually find the percent daily value of total sugars. And then at the bottom, there's this nice little legend and footnote that actually tells you what it means. What does percent daily value mean? That what's a little of something or a lot of something, and then if you look at the list of ingredients that are available on products, there have also been some upgrades and changes that I think are super helpful. Like there's more spacing between the words. I'm sure lots of you have been in the grocery store and you've picked up a product and you're really excited about it because you want to try it and you want to check to see if it has any gluten. And for the life of you, you can't read the ingredient list, and it's an absolute tragedy because all you want to know is if you can buy it or not. But the font is like -10, so the fonts are bigger and the words are spaced, and there's definitely more information about sugars that are there. And just for anyone who doesn't know, the way that it works in Canada for a list of ingredients are listed in order of weight. Okay, so the beginning of the list is the ingredient that weighs the most, and the ingredient at the end is the one that weighs the least. So it kind of goes in order of most to least. And so you also want to pay attention to what your products have in them. There's oftentimes a lot of people who will have rules for themselves around, if I can't pronounce the word or I don't know what it is, I will put that product back. You certainly don't want to be eating a diet rich in products that has 30 plus ingredients in it, half of which you can't pronounce. It's not the goal. So in addition to learning about the nutrition facts of products, and in addition to being able to find out if there's gluten in these products, you most certainly also want to know about those ingredients, and you want to know whether you want to be eating those products or not. So it's really important to read these nutrition facts labels and to become more informed about products, which then brings me to my next topic that I really enjoy chatting about, and that's snacks versus treats. I often get asked a lot about, give me some ideas for great gluten-free snacks, that I could send my kid to school with, or what can I prepare as a gluten-free snack? And I find that the term snack and treat often get interchanged, and I'm not Winston Churchill, and I don't have an extensive vocabulary, but I will say to you that when you look up the word snack and when you look up the word treat in the dictionary, they are two very different things. So I very much want to identify that snacks and treats are not the same thing. I want people to look at snacks as mini meals. So as opposed to being okay with, quote, a snack, just, being that high sugary, gluten-free granola bar, reevaluating whether or not that's what you would serve for a meal. And if you wouldn't, then it was more so a treat than it was a snack, because snacks are a part of healthy eating. Snacks are a part of what we eat every day, all day long. And this study by Vatan Parasat, looking at, eating behaviors of Canadians and using the Canadian Community Health Survey results as well, showed that amongst all Canadians, up to nearly 23% of total daily energy intake comes from snacks. I mean, that's a quarter. It's a quarter of all the calories that you're eating all day long come from snacks. And so if we're thinking that snacks are treats, then of course that could contribute to poor nutritional quality, whether it's a gluten-free diet or not. Here's my math for healthy gluten-free snacks. You most certainly always want to include one fruit or vegetable. You definitely want to include a source of protein as well. One of the benefits to having a source of protein isn't just that you're meeting your needs, but that proteins are satiating. That means that they're filling. And so they'll hold you over until you actually have your next meal or snack. You could use a gluten-free grain or starch, and then you create a healthy gluten-free snack. And only in the interest of time, because I know that everybody that's participating tonight, depending on where you are in Canada, it might be late for you, it might not be, but I'm not going to go through each of these ideas or options, but just to let you know that there's other great healthy gluten-free snack ideas that the Canadian Celiac Association and us colleagues can put together to share with you. But here are some great ideas. And then what does it mean, this healthy lifestyle, healthy eating as part of a healthy lifestyle, and these healthy snacks that I just gave you examples of? It means a lot of things. And what I've listed here for everyone are just some of the things that I talk about in practice that I hope are ideas that you can reflect on and think about and talk together as a family to kind of sort of support each other, to do together, to achieve together. Definitely always read labels, know what it is that you're purchasing and eating. If it doesn't come from nature, then you really want to know what it is that you're putting into your body. You certainly don't want to drink your calories. And if you do, like myself, I've tried not putting sugar into my coffee every day. I really have tried, but I just love it a bit too much, then I'm just that much more aware of the other beverages that I'm drinking throughout the day, Remind yourself that snacks count, okay? Snacks count as calories. They can contribute to a lot of calories during the day, and they are not treats. Treats are just that. They're meant to be on occasion, on special occasions, So really thinking about your snacks as mini meals is important. You don't want to skip your meals. You want to know portion sizes. Even though Health Canada's strategy to healthy eating doesn't have portion sizes per se anymore that are advertised, you still want to know how much you're eating. And so I provided visuals here for everyone to see what is 100 calories. So 100 calories comes from, on average, your juice box, that's 200 mils. That usually most often gets packed into lunches for youth. It's also about half a cup of cooked brown rice, or it's 10 cups of romaine lettuce. Huge difference, same calories, huge differences, right? Some, of course, you still want to have brown and wild rice as part of whole grains in a healthy diet, but you don't need to have 3 cups, right? You can certainly have endless amounts of vegetables. I always like to say if you're hungry after your meal, you can definitely have seconds, but you want to make those helpings vegetables only. And you certainly want to not only limit the amount of packaged or processed foods that you're eating and buying, but you also want to avoid eating from the packaging. Okay, so sitting with a bowl of potato chips, gluten-free of course, is very different than sitting with a bag on your couch while you binge Netflix, as do I, because I thoroughly enjoy that. But as well as, you know, knowing about strategies, you also want to practice something referred to as mindful eating. And Health Canada touches upon this. We certainly speak to it. Mindful eating, you know, if I could describe it, in essence, it means being present while you're eating. You want to minimize the distractions, the electronics, the games, the TV, the, you know, even music sometimes, and you want to maybe share. You want to share the experience. You want to slow down. You want to engage all your senses while you're eating again. You want to take smaller bites, chew more. We all know chewing is super important. One strategy that my colleague shares with me is to put the fork down between bites. And so not until you're done chewing do you pick up the fork again to enjoy that second and third and fourth bite. You know, you really want to listen to your body's cues. It's often been said that if you feel thirsty, it means it's too far gone. Your body needed fluids a long time ago, you know. So you want to drink all day long and you want to nourish yourself with water, but you also want to eat when you feel hungry and stop when you're full. And sometimes your body can't tell you those cues because it's too distracted by something else. If you practice mindful eating, you can then also enjoy a healthy lifestyle as part of healthy eating. And I think that's where there's so many more tips that I could share with you. You want to eat together. You want to make healthy eating a priority. It's got to be on everyone's radar. Otherwise, it becomes challenging or it becomes forced. Or for individuals with celiac disease, it can become isolating. You know, it's not about pinpointing any one person out. You know, it's about everyone in the family can eat healthy together. There might be some minor changes if you have celiac disease, but in general, it should be a priority for everyone. You also want to plan, you want to budget, you want to know what it means to go shopping with a grocery list and sticking to that list, as opposed to going to a store feeling overwhelmed by there not being enough time, sticking everything into the grocery thought that you think you need, but you weren't sure if you need it or not, and then unfortunately wasting food because of spoilage or other issues. You also want to budget, shop for things in season, shop for things when they're on sale, and then freeze them and use them later. We know eating healthy is costly, and that one of the advantages to some convenience and maybe poor quality nutritional choices are related to cost, you know, so strategizing around that is super important. You want to use your leftovers as a result of that and minimize wastage. You know, you want to definitely cook more at home, but then in terms of having a healthy lifestyle, you also want to make sure you're sleeping well and you're physically active, both things of which are super important, but you know, we won't touch upon tonight because I've just got some other tidbits of info, and again, the slides you'll have, so you'll be able to access all these points, is you want to make sure that as part of a healthy lifestyle when you're eating out, you're also maintaining those healthy eating principles. Remember, it's not about a diet. This isn't a diet. It's not meant to torture anyone. It's not meant to deprive you of enjoying food or going out, even if it is gluten-free, but it's about knowing how to do so and how to do so effectively. Communicate, communicate, communicate when you're out, you know, research as much as you can online, make phone calls, get to know management. And I don't just mean that at restaurants. I mean that at grocery stores. Get to know your local grocers, get to know your management team, get in touch with them and ask them about when certain products might be coming in that are out of stock, or if they could order in a SKU for you because you might not be able to order it in from other countries like the States. You know, when you're eating out, don't forget your vegetables, and you know what, get through them first. That way you can enjoy your treats. The other one last thing about, you know, eating well and eating healthy while you're having or affected by celiac disease is when you go away from home. So one of the things that I certainly get asked a lot about, which might not reflect concerns for everyone that's participating tonight, but what happens when you go away to school? In this case, I mean, I think camp is another great example. Sometimes individuals are gone to camps for a couple of months that have celiac disease, or what happens when you go away for college and university. You know, about preparing yourself on how you can eat well and educating yourself on what's available on campus and off campus. Learn about those school meal programs, as well as how to opt out of them for medical reasons. If you don't feel that the handling, the preparation, the availability of gluten-free products are safe, then that means that you cannot medically do what is necessary for your condition. So see what other options are available. Learn about what the rules are for mini appliances. Can you have a mini fridge in your dorm room? Can you have a hot plate, you know? And how is this going to positively or negatively impact your experience? You know, it's a personal choice if you want to live off or on campus, but some of your decisions may be influenced by having celiac disease and wanting to maintain a healthy living lifestyle with that, you know. And don't forget sharing appetizers, sharing desserts, but, you know, sharing bulk purchases together, whether that be Costco runs for toilet paper or for, you know, gluten-free products. Don't forget to share. So that is a lot that I reviewed. I know that I've gone just a little over time. I still would love to take any questions from anyone in the audience. I'd be happy to do so. That's not an issue. But just before I stop talking, I hope that the information that I've shared with you tonight shows that most Canadians, that means with or without celiac disease, and whether they're a dietitian or not, wink, wink, can improve behaviors related to healthy eating. So I'd really like to encourage everyone to support each other, families supporting each other in terms of making healthier choices and behavior changes to nourishing our bodies. And while the gluten-free diet is most certainly associated with nutritional deficiencies, both the diet itself as well as individuals affected by celiac disease, I hope that I've highlighted that some of that risk can be mitigated not only by adhering to a strict gluten-free diet, which is the therapeutic aspect of it, but by eating a variety of nutritiously dense foods that align with Canada's health strategy. So I hope everyone can consider a more holistic approach to healthy gluten-free eating, and that includes behaviors and lifestyle changes. So thank you.
Thank you.
I will leave that to you, Gauri.
Thank you, Inez. Thank you for such a comprehensive overview, and I'm sure it was immensely helpful. Well, it did help me a lot to make points how to talk to the clients next time. So please make sure to join our CCA moderated Facebook groups. There's a lot of help out there, and we will be getting to questions shortly. Before that, I would like to say if you enjoyed tonight's presentation, please consider making a donation to help us continue delivering programs and services. You can visit us at www.celiac.ca and click the donate button. You will also receive an evaluation link. So let us know how we did tonight and what more you'd like to learn about. And then,
yes, kudos, please share. Please do.
yes,
It
and
helps
remember,
us tremendously.
definitely. So remember, next month we have Dr. Dominika Gidrovish coming to host another webinar. She's on our professional advisory council, just like Inez is, and a clinical lecturer for pediatrics at the Alberta Children's Hospital and Research Institute. So she'll be doing an education series on diagnosis and management of celiac disease in children and teens. So that's next month. Date is 16th of September. If you haven't signed up for it, it's on the events page of the Canadian Celiac Association. Easier way to get more information about our education is sign up for the newsletter, and we are going to send you tons of stuff. New research, recalls, things to do, and awesome recipes. And in November, we also have our virtual conference, so keep a lookout when we put it up. Now on to questions. Okay, so I'm going to read the question, and Inez, I am going to leave you to answer them. So they say,
Okay.
is there a recommendation for children to drink water over milk, or is it this more of a recommendation for adults?
Oh, that's a great question. So that was part of the controversy when the new, kind of sort of eating strategy came out. It was no longer age-based either. So certainly having milk as part of your diet, it still is a healthy choice. I mean, if we're talking about cow's milk is a good source of protein, as well as calcium, vitamin D, and vitamin A, right? So it's not to say that milk needs to be excluded from the diet per se. However, there are a lot more individuals that are interested in cow's milk alternatives as part of their diet. So plant-based milks are popular, and those are enriched and fortified. So you can still get other nutrients, such as calcium and vitamin D from those options. But it's also to say that if your kid doesn't like to drink milk, I've met lots of patients who, whether they're newly diagnosed and maybe are a little bit more lactose intolerant, or whether they just don't like the taste of milk, they don't drink it, and that's okay. You can still meet the nutritional needs of growing children, whether you have cow's milk as part of the diet or not. I think the only thing that I would say is just to caution certain age groups are associated with loving milk and might drink too much of it. And then that puts them at risk of other nutritional deficiencies because they're displacing food with milk. So it does become a balance, but there is not at this time point certain number of cups that a child needs to have a day. I will say, however, this is as an aside, and if you'd like more information, you can look at the calcium tip sheet that the Canadian Celiac Association has on their website, or you can look at other reputable websites like, Dairy Farmers of Canada and whatnot. But it's challenging to meet the calcium needs of growing children and adolescents if there isn't much dairy in the diet, And while there are certain foods that are rich in calcium, people talk about almonds and kale and broccoli, you really need to eat a lot of those foods to meet those calcium needs. So I will say that we do end up having lots of patients who go on a calcium supplement, should they choose not to have cow's milk or fortified milk alternatives in the diet because it just becomes too hard to meet the calcium needs for growing children. So depending on how old the child is, if you're looking at, I believe it's between the ages of 1 and 3, it's 700 milligrams a day. 4 to 8 is 1,000 milligrams a day. And then from 9 to 18, it's 1,300 milligrams a day. So just to make everyone aware of that consideration around milk.
Okay, next question. Can brown rice be considered as a whole grain?
So brown rice isn't necessarily considered a whole grain. However, it is different than brown rice in the sense that it's fiber content and its type of starch is a little bit different. So not necessarily a whole grain, but what I tell individuals to do is then you mix in some wild rice in there, and that's how you can kind of sort of increase that whole grain variety that you want out of that dish. But great question. I will say, and I always end up going back to the Whole Grain Council too, just to refresh my memory.
Okay, so if you react to oats, what are the other whole grains that celiacs can eat?
Yeah, so those were listed in the table and they will be available for everyone to review, but I would say some of the ones, so quinoa is a great option, millet is a great option, kasha, there's amaranth, even corn. People forget about corn. So the kernel of a corn is a great source of insoluble fiber, you know, keeps things moving through. Ground or refined corn, which might be repurposed into gluten-free products, is a little bit different, but just adding corn into your salad, adding corn into soups and stews, make sure you keep that kernel there. It is also a great alternative too. But if the audience is interested in some gluten-free whole grain ideas and recipes, let us know, because we can certainly share those with everyone. If that list and like that table in isolation just isn't enough info for you, happy to put stuff together.
Okay, our next question is it possible for children diagnosed with celiac to repair their villi? There are a lot of questions on this one, so I'll start with one.
To
Repair their villi.
so just to clarify, to repair their villi with supplements or in general to repair their villi?
In general.
Oh, okay. So I would certainly say that that is a question that would be likely better answered or better targeted for next month's webinar. But I can certainly tell you what we say in clinic to our patients is by adhering to the strict gluten-free diet, which is the current treatment for celiac disease. And yes, the villi can regenerate themselves and heal, but what is different from patient to patient is the amount of time it takes and what that journey is going to look like.
Okay,
But
and
I was going
next
to say, but
question.
the quick and dirty answer is yes.
Okay, do probiotics help or any other supplements help in repairing or in helping, or what is the estimated time frame for children to start thriving after a diagnosis?
So to my knowledge, I'm not aware of probiotics in particular that are beneficial in it, that as it relates to the healing. The one thing that we know about celiac disease is its trigger, unlike some other autoimmune gastrointestinal conditions where the cause and the trigger is unknown, and probiotics have been studied to see if it can mitigate inflammation and help manage the disease. But I'm not aware of probiotics doing that. I am only aware that in some individuals with celiac disease that also are affected by irritable bowel syndrome, probiotics sometimes may help them with their symptoms, but that becomes a conversation to be had with the gastroenterologist around making sure that if you do have celiac disease and you still have GI symptoms or you feel unwell, that you know if it's related to celiac disease or something else. I'm not aware of anything else out there nutraceutical wise or available on the market that can speed up that healing either. I think if there's anything that a lot of the studies done decades ago where you could actually more frequently scope patients to see, you know, how the villi were healing, it showed that it takes time and it is very individual patient to patient. So if you do have particular concerns, I would certainly reach out to your gastroenterologist.
Yeah. And that's the same question next. So I think that answers it for the supplements. Our next question is, how can you help fuel young athletes without over calorie loading, but provide snacks during long training sessions that satisfy? My 10-year-old is a gymnast. Due to small stature from years of not thriving, she is now constantly hungry, especially at night.
Yeah, I would say athletes especially, snacking becomes super important, both pre-training or pre-game time, because you don't want to feel too full. Nobody wants to feel weighed down before performance, but also after, because that's super important for repair and recovery. I'd say one certainly very easy, convenient, and tasty snack is smoothies. Having homemade smoothies, you can have them pre-mixed where you just shake them. There's really, really good containers available out there now that keep things very, very cold. So you could even just blend with ice. And serve that. The other thing would be to have things that pack well in a gym bag. So in addition to having, these cold options, these cold, refreshing, smoothies, and you want the smoothies to definitely have protein to repair the muscle and carbohydrate to replenish glycogen stores, in addition to being a source of micronutrients. Super, super easy to add, if you wanted to, and if there was a need, some, vitamins and minerals in there. You want things that pack well in a gym bag. um, because nothing's worse than when you have like soggy cheese come out of your gym bag and you're like, oh, great, cheese and gluten-free crackers, mom, amazing. But, they have a slime to them. So you want things that will hold well, and that's where protein bars can come in handy. If you're concerned about products that are available on the market, then certainly making your own protein balls or bars at home that are gluten-free, and you freeze them. And then you just take them out frozen and you pack them in the gym bag so that, like, and I keep using after school as an example, even though I know we're all experiencing COVID, but like, I'm just thinking, hours later when it's thawed out, it actually tastes really good. It's got good texture to it and good bite to it. Trail mixes are also dry. And so you can add, hopefully, provided that facilities aren't nut free, but you can add nuts into it. Nuts are great sources of fats and carbohydrates and proteins. And then you can throw in some fun treats in there like chocolate chips, and gluten-free pretzels, so that it doesn't come across as just being, vegetables and bean dip, but it's things that can actually hold well in a gym bag. And you'll find that you're going to cycle through them. And I just want to reassure everyone here that it's okay if you repeat the same snacks over and over and over. Nobody's expecting families and parents to constantly have the rainbow available, nor is it necessary. I will have and have for the better part of a decade. I have had yogurt with frozen fruit every day in my diet, plus minus some granola. And that's okay if there's repetition or if you have a go-to. I think where it might become a little bit challenging is if there's taste preferences around some of the gluten-free options, and that's where making some things at home might be more advantageous, because then you can really play with, adding bananas or adding applesauce or adding avocado or some of these other things into recipes, adding more cocoa if that's the case, to make it taste yummy.
So, although we have a lot of questions, I'm going to pick up a couple and then I'm going to send the rest of the questions to Inez. She'll answer and I will get back to you with those in written. But there is one last question I'd like to take because
Sure.
we've really run over, and I think people would like to even if have put their children to bed if they've not gone to sleep. And yes.
Absolutely.
So this last question is, given that our gluten-free flours are not always enriched, the Harvard slides that you showed recommended a daily multivitamin. Would you recommend a daily multivitamin if you need the GFD? And if also, what type of a multivitamin would you recommend children and adults separately?
Yeah, no, that's a question I certainly get asked a lot. So I can tell you here, say kids, we don't necessarily say everybody needs a multivitamin. Ideally, you would meet your nutrient needs by eating a variety of foods and do the things that we chatted about tonight. But that's not always easy. And sometimes, despite best efforts, you're just unable to meet those needs. And so a multivitamin is kind of sort of, I like to refer to it in practice as a jack of all trades. Okay, so you get a little bit of everything. And there's certainly no harm in supplementing with a multivitamin if you feel that you and or your child are not able to meet the recommendations that were reviewed tonight. Like if you say, no matter how hard I try, my kid won't eat vegetables. It doesn't matter how I make them, how I dress them, how I hide them, they're not going in. Then I would say to you as a patient of mine, arguably, then you're at risk of not meeting your needs, and a multivitamin would serve a purpose. Um, so yes, I do think that multivitamins have a role, and I think it's if you are unable to meet the recommendations that were discussed tonight, particularly fruits and vegetables, you know, because that's where we get a lot of our micronutrients from, especially with gluten-free grains not being enriched or fortified, you know, so you're looking at sources of B vitamins and you're looking at iron and these kinds of things. Now, whether or not you need a separate micronutrient to treat a deficiency, that would be in review with your medical team. But in terms of which one I recommend, I certainly don't have any particular brand that I would recommend. But what I do caution families around, and part of the reason I don't recommend brands is, number one, brands are always changing, and nobody's calling Inez at Sick Kids telling me what they changed in their product, you know? So it becomes one of those things where reading the label of multivitamins that are available either online or at health food stores or at grocery stores or at pharmacies is important. And so the one thing that I caution for everyone is you don't want to pick something that's called a multivitamin that only kind of sort of has a little. You want to pick something that has all your micronutrients, even the ones you can't pronounce, like, you know, selenium and, you know, molybdenum if you can find it, you know, because some multivitamins, they only give you a few of the B vitamins and a little bit of iron, and then they say they're a multivitamin, but it's missing a lot of micronutrients. So you want to know what's included in there. You want it to have the bulk of the micronutrients that you think are of concern, and know that multivitamins, because they are a little bit of everything, you might not be meeting the needs. For example, some of the nutrients of consideration like calcium, where you need a lot of it in the day for the body. You know, I hope that answered the question. You know, I would say multivitamins serve a purpose, but I don't have any particular brands that I recommend. I encourage families to go out and to find something that they can afford, and to find something that their kid is willing to take, whether it's liquid or chewable, but to make sure that if you're gonna give a multivitamin, it has the vitamins and minerals there.
Okay, we still have a lot of questions. I'm going to download them, and rest assured to all our participants, I'm going to send them to Inez, who will give me the answers, and I will get back to you on them. Meanwhile, if you have more questions, info@celiac.ca is the email ID you can send all your questions to. And I would like to say thank you to our participants for being here with us, our presenter Inez for taking the time out for being with us, and our sponsors for tonight's Udi's Gluten-Free and Glutino. I wish you all health and happiness. Stay safe and goodbye, and see you soon next month on our next webinar. Bye bye.
Bye. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.